I wasn't kidding about the lights. Like, I really can't see anything except for like the front row of the audience. So, like, I mean, it might be about time. Like, it's time to work on a Locknote, and I think that's what we're all here for, hopefully. And I got a little bit of help when coming up with this one, so take it away, Clippy. So yes, welcome to DDD Melbourne, and we are going to be coding like it is 2005 because I've got some reasons, let's explain that, but I wanted to really have some fun with PowerPoint animations and relive what it was like in 2005 to try and do slide decks. As Lars said, my name's Aaron. Yes, I've been around DDD Melbourne for a very long time. I currently work for Microsoft in the developer advocacy team, or developer relations team. Yes, I am an old person, and that was kind of why I want to put together this talk. But coming up with a Locknote is actually a little bit challenging because you're the thing that's standing between the prizes, going home, and most importantly, going to the pub. So I had to come up, I didn't know what to do. So I sent Lars a message and I said, and he said, well, can you just come up with a title and abstract for it? I'm like, okay, well, you got any themes, anything you want me to talk about? And like, because I didn't know what to do with this and how to come up with something that would be entertaining to finish off today. So that is how we landed at this session. I hope that it is going to resonate as well as Lars was confident that it would resonate with everyone. Let's jump across, not to that one. We're going to jump across to this screen. Because yes, we are going to be coding like it is 2005. The reason that I wanted to do that is that I got my first full-time job as a software developer in 2005. So yes, that makes me an old person. And before we jump into anything like that, hands up here. Who wasn't even out of high school in 2005? Keep them up if you were still in primary school. Keep them up if you hadn't even started primary school. To everyone who didn't put their hands up, how are the knees at the end of a day? Like, yeah, it's getting a bit stiff. Yes, so I got my first full-time job as a web developer. I've always been a web developer, always been doing .NET, and it was 2005. I was working for a digital agency here in Melbourne called Web Design Group, who became WDG and eventually Next Digital, before I moved to Sydney and worked for a bunch of other web design, like digital agencies and stuff like that. But this is the kind of machine that I had when I first started working. Yes, this is Windows XP. It is running on a virtual machine on my Windows 11 laptop because I was not installing that on bare metal. Fun fact, like this is actually really hard to set up these days. It's running in Hyper-V, and I'm actually using RDP to connect to it because it turns out that Windows XP doesn't do a 16:9 resolution, which I needed for the projector. It also couldn't do a resolution that was even remotely close, and it couldn't do that in anything above 16-bit color. But anyway, this machine has been set up with all the kind of technology that I had at my disposal. Yes, I have the most modern web browsers there are. Internet Explorer 6. Internet Explorer 6 was actually a phenomenal browser of its time. Like, there's a reason why it won the browser wars, and not just because Microsoft had the most money of any company to put behind it. But I've also got Netscape 7.2 as the most up-to-date version of Netscape. I wanted to get 4.8, which is actually more likely what we were testing for, because that was kind of the last Netscape before I fully finished off the browser wars. Unfortunately, I could not find an installer for 4.8 on archive.org that I would be able to do. And all this software, available for free on archive.org if you want to replicate it yourself. And I also have this new browser that had just hit 1.0 in 2005 called Firefox. Yeah, it's going to be a trip down memory lane with that. I got my first job as a .NET web developer. So again, this is set up as a .NET development machine. So I have Visual Studio .NET 2003, and that comes with .NET Framework 1.1, which was a wild ride. It nearly broke me trying to write a demo for this talk because .NET 1.1 was like, look, it's old, right? And there's a lot that's happened since 20 years of evolution of .NET Framework and then the .NET open source runtimes. But it had one feature that I really, really needed. That was generics. Oh my God, you would not believe how hard it was to build an application without generics. So Let's have a look, though, at what it was like to build software back then. I'm going to fire up Visual Studio. Here it is. And interestingly enough, this kind of, you can see where current IDEs and developer environments have got their historical designs from. And this obviously wasn't the first version of Visual Studio, but it still looks like Visual Studio. You can see the grandfather aspect of the modern day Visual Studio and other editors such as VS Code, Rider and the JetBrains family and so on and so forth. It's somewhat familiar, even if it is obviously looking dated because it was designed of a UI experience of the time. So we're going to be doing some web development, so I'm going to create a new project here. I installed everything that I was going to need for this. I've got visualbasic.net because you might have wanted to do that. I have Visual J Sharp. So this is an implementation of like a JavaScript runtime on the server before Node was a thing. But of course, I'm going to do this in C Sharp because it's the new modern .NET programming language. There was also a bunch of other fun stuff in this install that I completely forgot about or repressed. It's probably more likely I'd repress them, like crystal reports. Wow, there are a lot of old people in this audience. All right, so we're going to create this application, and I think I'm up to like 4 or 5. I'm going to create 5. Now, what's really interesting about creating an application, so the .NET framework at this point in time didn't have a built-in web server. So the location of this is I have to give it a HTTP endpoint because I'm going to be deploying this onto my own IIS instance that I'm running on my machine because I need a web server to run an ASP.NET application. So it is running out of IIS. So I have to give it that endpoint. So it's going to be running as a virtual directory inside of IIS called Web Application 5 because naming things sucks. And it sucked back then too. But IIS was the same thing that you're going to be running on a production server. So you're actually running kind of like a similar sort of server design as you're running locally as you would run in production, which is really just another, probably an XP machine sitting in the corner of your office. But here we go. We're on our surface for our editor. Now, back then, a lot of web applications as we think of them today didn't really exist. We were transitioning out of thick clients, and web was still it was still predominantly document-based. So web developers oftentimes were coming from a thick client background. So we would have a design surface. So I'm going to add a text box. I'm just going to drag a text box on. I'm going to grab a button. I'm going to chuck a button on there. Oh, let's actually line those up. Get some pixel perfect. There we go. That looks pixel perfect. And I'm going to chuck a label on here. There we go. Oh, let's try and line that up. Yeah, excellent. Cool. Web design. Yeah. I want to change some attributes of this button. I don't want it to say button. I want to say click me. There we go. Oh, I could do things like I could change some background colors. Look at that. Ooh, that's delightful. Anyway. Okay, cool. So there's the start of my web application. I want to do something. When I click the button, I want to do something. So I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to go into my C# code at the back end. So now I've got an event handler that is going to be wired up to that button, and we're going to grab our, I want to grab the value of the text box. So I'm just going to write that to the label. So we're going to create a string. We'll call that message. And then you'll notice as I'm typing, I'm not getting any IntelliSense or anything like that. Even if I start typing, the text box is called text box 1 because it's the first text box that I put on there. But I'm not getting any IntelliSense pop up to autocomplete, as we would expect. If I do control space, I would get that, but it's going to just find the first thing that is TE, text box. If I was to type 1, that doesn't match anything, so we don't have fuzzy matching in our IntelliSense. It is case insensitive, thankfully. And then we can go text, so I can go to the text, and then we are going to, what am I doing? Label, again, I have to go label control space 1, and then we're going to go text equals message. There we go. It also doesn't have var in the C# language, which that constantly tripped me up. You've got to remember to fully type something out. Let's hit F5. We'll launch that up, and there's Internet Explorer. Unfortunately, it hasn't full screened that window. Now on Windows 11, I just hit Windows up, and that would maximize it, but it doesn't. And so I press Alt space X, which is Alt space brings up the menu in the top left-hand corner. X is maximize. That is ingrained in my muscle memory. I cannot forget that. I can restore and bring it back down. I can do X, and we go back to maximize. Look at that. Who needs these fancy keyboard shortcuts of Windows up? I can just Alt space X. Okay, I also can't zoom. Like, IE doesn't support zooming. Like, I can't make that any bigger. Sorry to the people down the back, you cannot see my lovely web design. But we're going to say hello DDD, hit enter, and there we go. Look at that. I've updated a label, web design. But what's interesting, like, this is obviously happening entirely server-side. So I can stick a breakpoint here. Whoops, oh, I put the breakpoint in completely the wrong place there. I am not sure what I've got loaded. There we go, okay. There's a breakpoint. I don't know where that went. And like, so if I click me, so now I break on the server code, and then I can do so. So what's actually happening is we're doing a full post to the server, like we're called a postback. So we're posting the entire page to the server. We're then able to read the values of those text boxes. We're then able to write to the controls in the control hierarchy, and then get some stuff back out to the UI. Excellent, great. So that was kind of how you could get started in doing that kind of stuff. Let's stop the debugger. That will close. Yep, that closes IE. Obviously, this design surface is not great, but you could drop into HTML, and we would get some lovely HTML that is generated for me. Look at that. I told you it was pixel perfect precision. Precision absolute everything. But you've got to remember that a lot of these applications were coming from thick client development, and we were used to pixel perfect positioning. Responsive design wasn't a thing back then because you didn't really have the variety of resolutions that people could be running. You didn't have mobile phones. You didn't have orientation. It was like 640 by 480, 1024 by 768. Yes, I know those numbers off the top of my head as well. I didn't have to look that up. But those are the kinds of things. So you would design for a particular resolution. And it wouldn't matter if things were explicitly positioned. Like, you maximize the window if you can't see something, or scroll left and right and up and down. But what if you did actually want? Oh, another thing that again will possibly trigger anyone that is from a web forms era is run at server. If you wanted to be able to access a control from the HTML on the server side, you put run at server, and suddenly this was like a magic control. Like, I could read the value of a text box, or I could touch the button and wire up a click handler and things like that. Okay, anyway, let's jump over and have a... Look, this is right. I'm running this on my laptop in a VM, and there's some other stuff that's also running in the background that we'll need for the next demo. So it's not the most fast thing that there is out there. Let's just deal with that. So if you wanted to do actual web design, and you wanted to control the layouts and test out how you position some elements and stuff like that, you pop over the dev tools inside of the browser, and you would inspect element, you would change some CSS properties and stuff like that. We didn't have those tools available to us in 2005. Firefox had only just been released, but it doesn't have dev tools. It wasn't until a little bit later that you had Firebug, which is the precursor to modern browser dev tools. But that was an extension. Actually, it started as like a bit of JavaScript you would chuck in your page, and that's how it would pop up. And then Firefox saw that added extensibility, which is then it came as an extension. Then the other browsers eventually added it as features in themselves. It was an extension you could add to Internet Explorer just as a COM object, and then it would start to get built in, and so on and so forth. So for us to do quote unquote modern web design, like the stuff that we would think of it now, it was a lot harder because you would have to write it, render it in the page, and then see what it would look like. So let's pop open a browser. Again, it's just really annoying popping it because it wants to authenticate with something and go to a website and you can't get there. You can, funnily enough, get to Google still. This is Google in IE6 on a Windows XP machine. And it's still kind of it works. I didn't try searching anything, and I'm not going to do that. Funnily enough, this is what happens if you go to Bing. Bing just is full of JavaScript errors. That basically just kills. Yeah, go away. But also, you got to remember, JavaScript wasn't common in browsers back in 2005. It first popped up in Netscape browsers at the turn of the century. That's when it first got created. But it was closed source. It was proprietary. So when Microsoft implemented, they didn't implement JavaScript. They implemented JScript because they had to reverse engineer the JavaScript the way JavaScript worked in the Netscape browsers, because they didn't have licensing for it, so it was called JScript. That's why the Internet Explorer implementation of JavaScript back then had nuances that didn't exist in the other browsers. And then you saw that cascade out in as things like Firefox appeared, and then eventually it became more normalized by the time Google Chrome came on the scene in, I think it was 2008. Anyway, let's come to like some code that I wrote earlier. So here is modern web design as you would do it in 2000. So what I've done here is I've tried to do kind of like a basic layout. I've got a left column, which is a bit smaller than the center column, and you would set background colors on everything. I like really vibrant colors, so that's why I've chosen these here, but obviously you didn't have to go that route if you didn't want, like F0A is that lovely pink fuchsia on the left side. But the reason we would use background colors is that didn't influence the size of an element. Another technique was to put borders around things, so you could see the drawn borders, which was, again, useful if you were wanting to understand how an element's padding, margin, and positioning would all exist. But you put a 1 pixel border on things, and you've made that element 1 pixel wider. You do that more and more times, and all of a sudden, all the dimensions are out. Background colors didn't have that impact. And this is kind of what we see with modern dev tools. You hover over something, and it's actually, the original ones were just drawing background colors. That you didn't have to do it explicitly, it would do it for you. But yeah, you would use background colors to figure out where elements were, and then you might add in, say, like a border so that you could see where a margin was relative to the edge of the element and where content could flow up to it. But because I work at Microsoft, so I've got to make sure I've got some AI in it. So what I've done here is let's go to a different browser, something that I can zoom in. Funnily enough, I can zoom in Netscape. So we're going to go to Netscape. Yes, that redraw is super fun. So Netscape's going to attempt to load. I don't know what server it's connecting to, but like, yeah, cool. You're a thing still. Okay, let's go. Oh yeah, that's looking beautiful. Okay, so we're going to grab. So I wanted to do like a bit of an AI spin, right? So that's why it's retro chat GPT. And I thought, what better than to use the DeepSeek R1 model? Because it's the most recent model that we had when I was writing this demo. And every time I change the drop-down list, it's actually going to submit the form. So I'm going to get a potential security warning. I don't want an alert. But the browser was starting to tell me that I was submitting information over unsecured connections. And let's see, why is the sky blue? Let's ask it something simple. Where's my cursor? There it is. All right. So again, this is all just submitting it back to the server. I could stick some breakpoints on it. The way I'm running this model is that I'm running it on Olama on my host machine. I was actually going to use an Azure AI deployed model, but I can't because I couldn't authenticate it because that uses TLS 1.2. I didn't have TLS 1.2 back then, and there's no I couldn't downgrade that. So Olama was an adequate intermediary step. So here we go. There we go. There's our response from a modern model, and God, web design sucks. Even just getting that box, the text box at the bottom, that's position absolute right there. And it's broken. I couldn't make it any different. But let's have a look at some of the code that's sitting behind this one. So here is our web form one. Ooh, something is busted. All right. I was changing with some settings. Hey, the font didn't change across here, so let me update that. So there we go. It's a little bit more, readable. This is not going to render out the designer because I'm actually doing a whole bunch of CSS, and the designer just falls over and doesn't like it. So let's come to our CSS. Oops, not that class. So here's our CSS. Everything screams at you as well, like HTML body. All the elements have to be uppercase because I don't know why. I don't know why do we do that. I've created some classes. I've got some CSS hacks in there that we had to do. So things like star inline, because I want that to only be applied in IE, and IE would then read that star and use that attribute, that CSS property instead of a display property. Also, the star height is executing a JavaScript expression in the CSS. So, how many years did it take us to get calc and stuff like that in CSS? Just run some JavaScript in your CSS file. What could possibly go wrong? But again, like everything is just yelling at me as well, and that makes me a little sad. But that way, like, we still had the primitives of what we think of CSS today: positioning, some basic layouts, paddings, float, and then again, for all of the old timers, the clearfix class. Because of the way the box model was implemented in Internet Explorer, they implemented off a pre-release version of the CSS spec when IE 6 shipped, which meant that they didn't implement the box model the way that the spec finally finally defined it, and then browsers that followed up implemented it correctly per spec. So IE had some fun nuances with that. There we go. Like that's some, but that's a basic layout, and you can see kind of why we would use tables as well for a lot of our layouts, because that gave us a lot more of a predictability in things, and that was consistent because tables had been in HTML for a lot longer than CSS had existed, so we had some more predictability in it. So let's have a look at the code behind our web form. No, I don't want to go to that. I want to go to the code behind. There we go. Now, to talk to my Olama server, I've had to obviously make a web request. I've had to get some response back, and that comes back as JSON. JSON wasn't the way that we talked with servers back in 2005. So I didn't have a JSON serializer or deserializer in .NET 1.1, so I had to write one without generics. There's a lot of array lists and hash tables with everything being an object and relies on casting. So I load that list of the models in the drop-down list on the page load. I don't want to do that on a subsequent load, so I'm checking if this page is a postback. So when you've submitted, say, the ask, then we're just going to read the models out of view state, and then we're going to exit. We're not going to perform the subsequent request. View state, for anyone that is not old enough to have been using any of this technology, view state was a way that we created server-side persistence between we persisted between requests, because again, we were coming from a thick client model where you would have data persistence or like object memory persistence, but web is stateless. So how did you do that? Well, we serialized stuff and put it in a hidden field on the form, and that was base64 encoded, I think, using the machine key. So you could actually decrypt it if you knew the machine key. Cool little fun hack. But it meant that I could load this data once, and then every subsequent request I would have it available. I would be able to repopulate that drop-down list without going back to the server that provided me that initial data. So it was a really common pattern. It just made your pages very heavy. But as I said, I've got my lovely little JavaScript serializer and deserializer, which it's got a huge amount of edge cases that will probably break for a lot of things. Basically just walks every character and works out, is it an object, is it an array, and then it will attempt to deserialize, throw a couple of exceptions if things aren't properly structured. A lot of this was actually written by ChatGPT. I've repressed a lot in the last 20 years. Okay, so we load our model list, and then this is going to iterate over the hash table. It's then going to add items dynamically to the control list of our drop-down list, so it is populated. I have a model changed event wired up, so when you select an item in the drop-down list, it actually submits that to the server so that we have the selected model as a variable available on the server. We don't have to, and it gets included in every request thanks to view state. And then I have my chat submit method here, which is then going to make sure that there was a message. If there wasn't, exit out. I've created a class called chat request, and then we're going to then serialize. Because again, I had to write a serializer for JSON because again, that didn't exist. Like JSON as an idea had been around since 2002, 2003, but it wasn't common. We were dealing with XML. That was the primary way. We serialize some stuff, we send it to the server, that comes back, and then I'm iterating over that object, turning things into arrays out of the hash table and so on and so forth. And I'm just doing some string formatting so it looks quote unquote better when it comes back. But this is how we build applications. This is this sort of design, obviously this is all in the code behind of the ASPX file rather than split it out into services and stuff like that, like Ben was talking about in his talk. You could do that kind of stuff, and those kind of design patterns were still very applicable. We maybe didn't have dependency injection and whatnot, but you could still do a very complex architecture using these tools at the time. But let's take our application and let's go a little bit further. Oh, actually,
before I go a little bit further, because we had JavaScript, if you wanted to write JavaScript, that wasn't the easiest thing because, well, we didn't have a JavaScript console in the browser. Like, how do you test JavaScript? Like, you couldn't put a breakpoint in the browser. In Internet Explorer, you could actually attach to from Visual Studio and you could debug the JavaScript. But as soon as you did that, you couldn't edit the JavaScript file and reload the page. It kind of locked that file. So that was a bit annoying. So what we would most commonly do is we would create a file, and I've just called this JavaScript Playground, ROUND-ASPX, which is just a giant text box where I could write some JavaScript. Alert, hello, DDD. And then I'm just debugging, like, this is the code that's going to execute, and then I just use eval and execute code. So like, this is how you would test out JavaScript without having to write it in write in a tool, test it. Oh, there's a JavaScript error like we saw with Bing. Maybe I'm able to attach Visual Studio to it and debug through it or whatnot. I would most commonly have this kind of a page or some way to inject this sort of thing into a page so that you could just write some JavaScript, interact with the DOM as it was, and then test things out. So let's see a arguably better version of the sample application. So this one is at chat.aspx. Actually, let's go to Firefox. Here we go. Because I think I can zoom Firefox, yes. Still a little bit broken. Yes, I've got some modern web design features such as the marquee element. It also has a blink tag wrapped around it, but blink doesn't work. None of these browsers supported blink. If I had Netscape 4.8, I think it supported blink. Or if I had tried to downgrade to IE 5, I might have got blink. But yes, it's a lovely little scrolling marquee across the top because nothing says pop, like very slowly moving text. Okay, so this page here, let's go, we can select our model here and let's go, why is the sky blue? And we'll hit ask. We got an immediate bit of user interaction because this is now running entirely as JavaScript. So I've basically taken that .NET code that I had and I did actually rewrite it as JavaScript. I didn't just get ChatGPT to convert it for me. But this has got a JavaScript collection which is managing the list of messages that have come back from the model. So when I've added an event handler onto that ask button in JavaScript so that when we submit, it's going to do a AJAX request to the server. But you have to write all of this by hand because we didn't have any way to just do this easily in the browsers, and we didn't have any libraries. jQuery didn't come out until 2006. Neither did YUI or Mootools. They were all 2006. We had Prototype. Prototype was I can see Phil. Phil is reliving the glory days of his career right now. So I've created a little AJAX method there, and one thing you'll notice is that the first couple of lines is that it's checking if XML HTTP request is available. If not, we're going to use an ActiveX object because in Firefox and Netscape we had XML HTTP request, but in Internet Explorer we had to create an ActiveX com object, which was the Microsoft.xml HTTP. Funnily enough, that's actually where the concept of AJAX started. It was the Outlook Web Access team. They wanted a way that they could communicate with the server and have a nicer web experience without having to load entire pages. And that was kind of preceded by doing it all as iframes. I wasn't going to go that far. Anyway, we've got our XML HTTP request object. We've got to create an instance of that. I'm capturing a couple of DOM elements that I'm going to be needing to work with. And all of this code is wrapped in an immediately invoked function expression. Again, that was a way that we would simulate what we now think of as JavaScript modules, isolation of JavaScript code. So I'm adding event handlers on change, on click. We're going to manipulate some attributes, but all of this is done manually because we didn't have libraries that would do that for us. I'm then doing some JSON stringification of the messages that I need to send up to the server. Again, I didn't have JSON natively built into the browser, so I wrote a JSON theory serializer and serializer. This is essentially the C# one. I just wrote it in JavaScript. And this is where you also find the nuances that you would have to deal with as a web developer. The JScript implementation in IE didn't support array indexing of strings. whereas it did in the JavaScript implementation in Netscape and Firefox, which means that to iterate through every individual one of these, I had to split it to an array. So I had to explicitly turn the string into an array. And that was just like, oh yeah, I forgot that that was a thing. And then this is going to make an AJAX call, and it's going to actually go to one of my ASPX pages, so one of my web forms pages. And let's just have a look at, let's go to post message, so where we send messages. So this one, it does actually have HTML and stuff inside of it, but I'm not using any of that HTML. Instead, I'm overriding the way that the page load works. We capture the input stream, so that's the body that's being posted up. We're then going to read that as a string, and then I'm making a web request across to my Olama server. That's then going to come back, and I'm sending that back as a response. It's JSON across the whole thing, and then we're just ending the response there in ASP.NET, which means that we're not actually going to render any of that HTML, which means that we get back valid JSON that we can parse. The other option was that we would use an ASMX file, ASMX web service, but then we would have to deal with XML, and I didn't want to be dealing with parsing XML in JavaScript in editors from this era. But let's have a look to see if we got back a response. This was in, looks like, so this has actually probably had a JavaScript error, and we can see it removed a message, but how do you fix that? Like, something's happened. I know something changed in that UI, and luckily, Firefox did actually have a JavaScript console, and I can here. Oh, yep. Looks like the split method doesn't exist on a string. Okay. Right. Fine. I'm not going to debug that because I'm just about out of time. But see, but this is then like, so now I don't have any way of debugging this code, and I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't looked at the JavaScript console. So I hadn't, like, there's no breakpoints I could set. I would have to then go back, I would modify some code, or I'd use my JavaScript playground window, and I would execute the code manually, and then just like modify things as I could to see if I could get to the right point. So, who's feeling triggered? No. Like I said, I'm nearly out of time, so I think that was, it was obviously a very quick lap around what it was like being a web developer 20 years ago. This code, I will put this code up on GitHub for anyone that wants it. It is in source control. It is in an SVN server. Git actually did exist. I think Git came out in 2005. I think that's when Linus first wrote it. And GitHub was on, I think it was the next year. Git and GitHub are very closely related in terms of their timelines. I forget exactly what they are off the top of my head. But you were using something like SVN or Visual Source Safe or even the precursors to those. The company I was working at was using Visual Source Safe. I wasn't going to set up that. I was going to set up SVN because that's a little bit easier. I have it running on my NAS back at home because, where the hell do you go to host an SVN server these days? SourceForge? So I'll publish this code for anyone that wants to have a look at it and just like, and reminisce. I have no idea if it would run on anything other than like this kind of a VM. But as I wrap everything up, I want to feel like it's kind of fun to look back and go, oh my God, everything was so primitive. But back then, the stuff we were doing was it was amazing. I worked on a custom CRM for a government agency here in Melbourne. And we were doing rounded corners on buttons because that was the style of the time. But we didn't have border radius, so what you would do is you would just make an absolute shit ton of divs that were 1 pixel wide and slightly offset from each other. That's how you would do a rounded corner. We were doing complex architectures. Like a CRM is not a simple bit of software, and we were doing it in this sort of technology without the developer tools that we have today. And as we look at, we've got things like GitHub Copilot and all that in our editors, like these AI assistants, and we go, oh my God, it's so, everything is so radically changing. AI is going to take our jobs or whatever we want to think about it as. And if I was to go back 20 years and talk to myself as a web developer and say, you know what, I've got a browser where I can open up a developer tool, I can click a button and emulate a mobile device orientation and resolution and do that across multiple orientations and resolutions. I can then manipulate the styles
put in breakpoints and live change that code without ever going back to the server, that would feel to me the way that I look at AI, going, oh my God, it's amazing, like, that is crazy. Why would you ever do that? How is that even possible? So as we look forward to the next iteration, the next generation of developer tooling, everything is always going to be changing. There's always going to be something new in the way that we do our work. All the stuff that's happened over the last 20 years, and as I look back, it hasn't replaced what I do. It's got rid of some of the tedious crap parts of what I had to do. And that's what I hope that AI-assisted tooling is going to be. And I look forward to 20 years' time, in 2045, to doing a talk about what it was like 20 years ago of coding in 2025, and seeing how different it was, and how we're going, oh my God, I can't believe this stuff is like so powerful. And in 20 years' time, what's that going to look like? And are we going to fear that change, or are we going to ride that wave? I, for one, am excited. I'm looking forward to the next 20 years as a software developer. Got to get one last transition in. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, DDD Melbourne, for having me back this year. Clippy out.